Hi everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Rachel Xifaras and I'm a final year genetic counselling student at the University of Technology in Sydney. And as part of my master's course, I'm able to complete a year-long research project. And I was lucky enough to conduct mine in the genetic neurodevelopmental disorder space alongside Dr. Erin Turbot, Dr. Claudine Grant, and Professor David Amor. So as you can see, it is my first conference. I haven't quite got the small title down pat, but my project title was A Qualitative Exploration of Parents' Views about Wearable Devices for Research and Treatment Monitoring of Children with Fragile X, Angelman and Prader-Willi Syndrome. So my research focused on the 3 genetic disorders that I just mentioned. They're often at the front line of neurobiologically targeted treatments, clinical trials and research compared to other disorders of unknown or complex genetic origin. And at the heart of clinical trial design are the selection of clinical outcome measures. So these are used to inform us whether essentially a trial or a drug is successful. And ideally, these outcome measures would be disease-specific, inclusive, and scalable. However, achieving these dimensions using traditional approaches can be quite complicated in diseases like Prader-Willi by the inter-individual disease heterogeneity, and as well as the feasibility and cost limitations of running clinical trials for rare diseases. So in the past, many outcome measures that have been used for Prader-Willi studies, such as questionnaires, psychological testing, and performance-based tasks, have proved challenging or can be unreliable due to unintentional biases. So to date, there are no known simple objective outcome measures for Prader-Willi that work well over a range of age and severity of symptoms. Which is where we get to wearable devices. So wearable devices are used to track biological metrics, so heart rate, step count, or sleep quality. And many of you are probably familiar with some of the commercially available ones for recreational use, so an Apple Watch or a Fitbit. But there's also medical grade devices. And that's what we are mainly interested in. So using them either for continuous monitoring to establish sort of personalised baseline measurements or for short assessments like the one that Claudine just spoke about. And it's the sort of sensitivity and the ability to provide objective, reproducible and non-biased measurements that make wearable devices an up-and-coming tool in health research. So as Claudine's just said, her team at MCRI used that small gate wearable for children with neurodevelopmental disorders. And the insight was used to infer severity, among other things. And it's thought that in the future, we can harness these insights to address each child's unique needs and challenges in a precision medicine approach. So at the moment, the use of wearable devices in health research is classed as innovative and new, which can bring an element of uncertainty or caution for the people who are at the front line of use. So there's currently quite limited research on the opinions of end users on wearable devices, let alone in the context of children with neurodevelopmental disorders. So one study using the strap-based wearable sensor Actimyo, which is a validated digital endpoint for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, explored the views of different stakeholders such as clinicians or technology companies through a narrative review, but key stakeholders such as parents were not directly consulted. So our project aimed to explore the experiences and views of parents regarding the use of wearable devices for children with genetic neurodevelopmental disorders. So to investigate this, I interviewed the parents of 14 children living with these conditions to explore their first-hand thoughts and views. So the aims and objectives of this study were exploratory, so we used a qualitative methodology to get an in-depth understanding of parents' views. So I individually interviewed participants using a semi-structured interview technique via the video conferencing platform Zoom, as I was based in Sydney. So to be included in the study, the participant had to be a parent or primary carer of a child aged between 6 to 18 with a genetic diagnosis of Fragile X, Angelman or Prader-Willi. And our sampling was purposive as we recruited directly from the families who were involved in Claudine's study. So at the conclusion of the interview phase, I reviewed and transcribed all of the recorded interviews and using a codebook thematic analysis approach and NVivo software. So put simply, this sort of involved reading through the transcripts and systematically tagging and naming single words or short phrases as a process known as coding. To make it more manageable, I then sort of clustered and grouped all of my similar ideas, which helped me find bigger ideas and identify broad patterns and themes across the data that was relevant to the research question. And this analysis approach led me to refine 3 core themes that answered my research questions. So the 3 themes were: parents were willing to take up new technology if it was feasible, parents were guided by previous healthcare and research experience, and early engagement with families in the research and design process of new technologies is important. So I'll quickly give a few examples to demonstrate these results, and just note all of the quotes that I've got here are all from the Prader-Willi group for today. So the first theme, parents of children with neurodevelopmental disorders generally had a fixed routine to help balance their activities. So there's physiotherapy, speech therapy, schooling. So changing or complicating this routine could alter the child's behaviour and therefore their movement. So consequences of some of the changes included causing the child to feel stress or anxiety, loss of confidence or regression in movement. So as demonstrated by the quote up there, my child gets very anxious and upset if we need to change things. So when considering incorporating a wearable device into their routine, parents really valued simplicity, convenience and ease. So this included a low time requirement, robust hardware, efficient attachment and removal, and clear instructions or training for parents to use the associated software. Within this theme, I also explored the option of using wearable devices remotely, so in the home or community setting. And as demonstrated in the second quote here, parents suggested that when their child was in a familiar environment, which didn't have to be at home, it could be at a local supermarket or a local park, the data collected was likely to be of higher quality as it was more representative of their confident and day-to-day movement. For the second theme, when discussing their views and motivations to pursue the use of wearable devices, parents often reflected on and made decisions in the context of previous experience with healthcare practitioners and disciplines. So parents reported both positive and negative experiences, with one parent saying, "Everyone we've worked with has always worked together," and another saying that "I feel glazed over," which I guess we heard this morning as well from all of the parents here today. So the experiences were either encouraging or created hesitancy towards new healthcare initiatives. So many parents also compared the wearable device to previous tests, which involved needles, electrodes, or medical imaging. And this often proved difficult due to higher rates of sensory challenges in the study cohort. So that contactless nature of wearable devices really increased parents' acceptability towards the new technology, with one parent saying, "There's no harm to the child, it's not invasive. Normally they get pricked, they get poked, I just feel like it's safe." So the final theme, parents openly shared information and advice on what new technology was likely to work best for their child. And if these suggestions were integrated into the design and design features of future wearable devices, parents were more likely to engage. So as expected, these suggestions were very unique to the 3 conditions that we studied. So today I'll focus on Prader-Willi. So parents of children with Prader-Willi syndrome reported that their children were able to walk independently and engage in regular physical activity. However, the hypertonia and scoliosis did create challenges. So parents were interested in a wearable device that could guide physiotherapy or exercise programs by providing information on muscle dominance, weakness, or imbalance. Parents also expressed that involving their child in the decision-making processes would lead to better outcomes and long-term uptake. So this included the decision to initially use the device, with one parent saying, as long as she's involved in the process, then she's more likely to agree. Or also the exterior design, so one parent suggested having it reflect their personality. So all the parents involved in the study were interested in learning more about wearable devices, particularly the utility in a remote setting. For wearable devices to be successful, we need to recognise the value of open dialogue and shared decision-making between parents and researchers, especially in those early stages and rollout of new technology. And this is especially pertinent in the context of children with neurodevelopmental disorders. And these conversations need to have a discussion of feasibility, especially the ease of use, the wearability and the functionality, as these were key motivating factors for parental decision making. However, we just have to keep in mind that feasibility does look different to each family, depending on the child and depending on the parents. So in the future, I guess to just increase the generalisability of our results, we need to be doing further studies that explore these findings and see if they're comparable among other parents with children who have a range of neurodevelopmental disorders, and explore it in a larger sample size, as I only spoke to 12 parents. And these cohorts need to have parents with diverse backgrounds who have had experience with other wearable devices, such as the heart rate monitors, or don't have any experience of use at all. But overall, the findings of this project filled a gap in the wearable devices space by giving the opportunity for end users to share their views and experiences. And in the future, this will aid researchers to design wearable devices that fit the families who will be using them. I'd just like to say a quick thank you to Dr. Erin Turbett, Claudine Cran and Professor David Amor for giving me the opportunity to be part of this research. Also the funding bodies for the wider study and the research foundations that aided us in recruitment. And the biggest thank you to the lovely parents and their children that I spoke to for contributing your time and thoughts, as without you, this research wouldn't have been possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Any questions? Yes?
I'm curious to know whether there are any issues with the skin contact. Do they play with them? Do they pick at them? Do they ignore them with the devices? Did your interviews, did the parents report anything in that space?
It was definitely different for each of the disease groups, but definitely for Angelman and Fragile X, we got a lot of that. Still with the Prader-Willi group as well, but for the device that we were looking at, the gait wearable, it wasn't as much sort of skin contact because it could be on the outside of the shoe.
Hi.
But definitely something that we are paying attention to. Yeah.
I think one thing that came out of all the interviews is that watches won't work because of the sensory issues.
That was a lovely talk. I just have a quick question. Did the kids get engaged in the project itself? Were they kind of interested in the idea of it? Did it motivate them to perhaps try harder to walk and participate?
I think probably is a question for Claudine, as I was only doing the interviews with the parents, yeah.
So so we put a little sticker on the device and we said, we're going to put this little butterfly on your foot, but very early stages. In the future, something that's fun that actually was a butterfly or something like that would work much better. The Prader-Willi group were probably the most easiest and fun to assess. They were pretty into it, and just anecdotally, they seemed to want to walk with the assessor without their parent for some reason. They liked to have that independent moment, and some of them were very chatty, and it was just lovely. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. Wonderful presentation. So the first question is, you mentioned that at-home assessments were better than at the hospital. Was a specific location at home? Is it going for a walk in the park, in a supermarket, or is it just across not being in the hospital made it better than?
Yeah, it was a bit of a mix and different for each parent. Some parents it was due to the travel time. They didn't want to go into the hospital. Other kids it was that they didn't like the hospital setting. In terms of as home, again, it was sort of parent it was very different. Some were keen to do it in sort of the local supermarket, or somewhere where their child isn't noticing that they're doing an assessment. It was really, each parent had a very different opinion.
Just imagine clinical trial in a supermarket.
Could be interesting.
Thank you.